on the first solve, you did the green V. You first solved this bar using this paired edge. So you'd solve the tip and did R prime L R, rotate it up to solve this edge by doing U prime R prime, and then rotated here and did the L4E algorithm. The solution that you chose to do was fine. I didn't have any issues with it. However, the way that you executed it, your turning was not very good. So to fix this, first you solved the V by doing R prime L R, and you regripped multiple times to solve this. The better way to do this would have been to pick it up, do the tip and hold it like this, and do R prime L R, and then rotate up here, and then do U prime L prime. So another note is when you rotated up here, you did U prime R prime, and then rotated to do L4E. However, that is unnecessary because you could have done it this way. So rotate this way, U prime L prime, and then you are in position to do your L4E algorithm. Now for the L4E execution, you did the correct algorithm. However, your execution was not very good. You only seem to be flicking from the back like this or this. However, for Pyraminx, it is better to do the U moves with your fingers in the front. So doing it like this, or like this, or this, or like this. This will save you a lot of time from trying to reach around back over and over when you could just do that instead of going like that. So next, when you do it, I would execute it like this: U, R, U prime, R prime, L prime, U prime, L. This will also be easier since you have smaller hands. You don't have to reach back as much. If you can get used to doing this, it'll use your size to your advantage. On the scramble, you did the yellow V. You started by solving this tip and then pairing up the yellow-red edge to its center by doing R prime to solve this center and bring this down, U, L, and that creates a bar. And here you can do a 3-move insert for the green, and you just have this L4E case like that. Your solution on this scramble was good. It was a 6-move V, but it gave a very nice L4E case. One thing that I noticed in your execution, however, was that on pickup, you only solved one tip, and then you started doing the V. And here you had a bit of an issue with recognition, which is okay. That's just something that comes down to doing more solves and trying to look further in inspection. So I'll just chalk that up as a mistake you make in competition. However, here was interesting. You solved 2 tips during your body. This is typically abnormal and not recommended. Normally what people do is they will solve 1, 2, or 3 tips at the start of their solve, and then solve 1 or 2 tips at the end of their solve. We typically try to avoid doing tips while you're executing the body because that can lead to inconsistencies, and overall it is just harder to turn. The best way to do the tips on this scramble would have been to do 2 tips at the start, and then you can go into solving the rest of it, and then rotating here, and then you could have done those 2 tips at the end. So leaving tips for just the beginning and just the end is a much more viable strategy long term. And if you can, I would try to do 3 tips at the start on 4-tip scrambles. This can be a little bit tricky to get used to. However, with enough practice, you can get used to doing multiple tips at one time. And I recommend this because doing 3 tips at the end of the solve is a lot harder than doing 3 tips at the start of the solve. And if it's a scramble with 2 or 3 tips that are scrambled, I would try to do 2 tips at the start and leave 1 tip for the end. It's a lot nicer to have only 1 tip left at the end of your solve compared to 2 or 3, just because it is easier to do tips on the pickup than it is on the drop. On the scramble, you did the blue V. You started by pairing up the red edge to make a bar, and then rotating and doing this with U prime R. And here you have a nice L4E case. So once again, your solution here was pretty good. You made a 4-move V and you got a very nice L3E case. So one more thing that I said before was that you were doing your tips just like one at a time and during the solve, when you should be doing them simultaneously at the start and end of the solves. And another thing I noticed was that you solve the U-tip with your thumb. This is pretty abnormal, as for doing it with the thumb, you have to reach all the way up here to do it, and you're getting your hand out of position to turn it. However, if you use your index finger, you can just do that or like that. It's much easier and you don't have to take your hand out of position. So apart from that, you go on to do the V. And once again here, you only do U moves while flicking from the back. And just to show you what the difference is, the way you executed it is like this. And now compare that to using flicks from the front. You can see my hands, you can see that my hands are moving way less. See, these fingers didn't move at all. The only fingers that were moving were my index fingers. And while that's same can be kind of said for flicking from the back, you see they're not moving whatsoever, my other fingers. Here, I kind of have to reach and they're all moving. So it's much slower to do it like this. If you can get used to flicking from the front, it'll be a very big help. On the scramble, you did the blue V. You started by solving these 2 tips, and then you need to solve this edge and this edge. But to do that, you first need to move this out of the way, and then you can bring it down and solve the V. And here you did the U move and then rotated, and then did the L4E like this. So the first thing I will say is I like that you did both tips at the start here. That's a very good way to do them. And here, especially, doing it like this will set you up so that you can do the first move of your V very easily. And then the rest of your V was good. This V was I actually very much like Vs like this, where you can do this sort of setup because it gives you a lot of options. So here you do that. And then here you decided to do the AUF and then rotate. What I would recommend is instead of doing that, rotate first and then do this, because then there's less pausing. Doing it like this and then like this, you kind of waste a little bit of time. It's hard to detect, but I think it's better to do it like this so that it's more fluid. And now here, the L4E algorithm that you chose to do was not very good. You did it like this to give this L3E case. However, it would have been better to do it like this, so then you can get an insert. And since you had it from this angle, I would have actually done it like this. This is my preferred algorithm, and that's doing U prime, L prime, U, L. And then you get this insert. And that also has no post AUF. The way this algorithm works is from this angle, instead of solving the edge that goes in the bottom here, instead of solving the red yellow edge, I'm actually going to solve this edge with L prime U L. So that solves it. And then I am just left with an insert.
Yeah.
On this scramble, you started by solving the tips, and here you saw that there was a 3-move red V, so you did that, and then rotated, and just like the previous solve, you did this algorithm like this. So once again, I really like how you did both tips at the start, and then you went and did the V, and as I said in the previous solve, I would recommend doing the algorithm like that to give an insert, or like this to give an insert. Another thing that I've noticed about your solving is that you always solve the V, almost always, you solve the V in the front like this, and then you rotate. This is not something that is very good to do on a regular basis. There are some instances where solving the V in the front is good. This case is one of them because it's hard to execute like that. But doing it in the front typically means you have to rotate, because once you get from here, you have to rotate to do L4E. However, in many cases, this can be avoided by executing it from a different angle, like that, which is not great, but in some other cases it can be good. So I would try to focus on building V's so that you don't have to rotate when you get to L4E. So once again, in this case, you're turning just like in other solves, you are doing the flicks from the back. However, this solve was your best, and I believe the reason was your turning was a lot more fluid on this solve, and the V execution was very fast, and you went right into this algorithm. So overall, I think that you are a very strong solver, especially for your age. I think you could work on learning how to do your tip execution better, and then doing it at the right intervals. So doing it at the start and doing it at the end. And then if you can learn to flick the U's from the front, this will drastically reduce your times. From what I'm seeing, I think you could drop your times by a quarter second to half a second just by making this change, because you seem to lock up a lot when trying to do this move, which makes sense considering trying to turn like that, it's, as you can see, I just locked up there, but then doing it like that is much faster, because here I'm getting so out of position, and I have to keep getting out of position to make the turns that I'm bound to have a mistake that happens, versus here it's much safer and much faster to execute. And then with the tips as well, the way I recommend doing them is you can do what you've been doing is good. I just wouldn't try doing the thumb U moves, because that can be a bit of a time loss. So you really need to focus on how you're holding the Pyraminx and the moves that you do and how they affect your positioning. because doing things that you have to reach a lot for is throwing your hands out of position. And so then you have to spend the extra time to get back into position. The way I recommend practicing this is by doing down solves. So what that is you take one scramble and you execute it multiple times. So do the same scramble over and over until you are happy with the time that you get. So for you, I would say try to make every scramble down solve until you can do it in under 3 seconds. And then once you can do that pretty consistently, try to push it like under 2.8 seconds, under 2.5 seconds. This will help you figure out how to turn. And another important thing with down solving is when you do it, really think hard about how you're going to execute. If the first thing that you did on your first attempt didn't really feel like it was that good, reevaluate, look at it, and then think maybe instead of doing the flick like this, I could have done it like that. Or maybe instead of doing the tip like this, I could have done it like that, and that would have made it better. This is a very slow and tedious process. You have to think a lot. However, over time, it becomes easier and you'll be doing the correct execution first try, which is the goal. And this will help you improve the fastest out of any other strategy because your solutions are actually very good. I had very little to say about your solutions, and that was because I think for your level, your solutions are a lot better than what your times are. And that is because your turning is holding back your times and not your solutions. With the current solutions that you are doing, I believe that you could average under 2 seconds. The only thing about your solutions is the way you execute them. So that includes rotations, the angle at which you start solving. And these are all things that come with practice and doing down solves.